Thanks for joining, everyone. We'll wait a few more seconds, so we're right at 6 o'clock before we begin. But as you just heard, we are recording this meeting, so it will be up on the website. You know of someone that wasn't able to attend, they can watch it back. All right, well, it is 6 o'clock on the dot. So to be respectful of everyone's time, we'll go ahead and get started with the Lincoln Flood Mitigation Master Plan public meeting, which is a mouthful, but we're happy to be here. Brian, if you want to click the next slide. So we'll start with a few housekeeping items. So Zoom webinars are a little bit different than the run-of-the-mill Zoom meetings. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll have a toolbar with a few different functions, but you'll see a Q&A button. So feel free throughout the presentation to submit any questions you might have. And at the end, our panelists will go ahead and answer any of your questions. There's also a chat button at the bottom of your screen. If you have any technical issues or anything of the sort, please put that in the chat. And I'd be happy to help assist with that. For those of you that just joined, this meeting is being recorded, and it will be posted to the project page on the City of Lincoln's website, and I will put that link in the chat as well for you to access. It should be in there right now, and then we will go ahead and get started with just some quick introductions of those that are on the panel. So Mike, do you want to go ahead and kick things off for the city?
I'm Mike Nendorf. I'm with the Watershed Division of the City of Lincoln in Lincoln Transportation and Utilities, and I'm the project manager for the mitigation project.
Erica, do you want to jump in?
Hello, I'm Erica Hill. I do communications for Lincoln Transportation and Utilities.
Great. We could just keep popcorning around. Rachel, you can go ahead.
Hi, I'm Rachel Christopher, and I'm with the Lincoln Planning Department.
Great. Terry, did you want to jump in? Just introduce yourself quickly.
Sure, I'm Terry Cathy at the Building and Safety Department.
Mark, go ahead, yeah.
Mark Hosking, Deputy Emergency Manager for Lincoln and Lancaster County.
Yep. Tracy, you want to jump in for NRD?
Yeah, I'm Tracy Zayak. I'm with the Lower Platte South NRD, and we are a co-sponsor of this project.
Adele, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Adele Phillips. I'm with the State's Department of Natural Resources. I'm the flood mitigation planner. And you might be hearing from myself or Katie Ringland for assistance on this project. We're happy to help.
Great. Rhonda, you can go ahead.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Nowak. I work for Michael Baker International, and we, along with Olson, are supporting the City of Lincoln on this project.
And then Brian.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Dunnigan with Olson. I'm a water resources engineer with Olson.
Awesome. And I'm Haley Engstrom. I am on the public involvement team at Olson, and I will also be your MC for the evening. So we'll go ahead and jump right into just an overview of what's to come this evening. So we'll start off just on our agenda. We'll start off with the community rating system overview, talk about the purpose of the master plan, the influence that past projects have on this master plan, some hazard mitigation activities, problems and possible solutions, and then we'll conclude with the planning process and the future schedule. Pass it over to Rhonda. Oh, Rhonda, you're muted.
After all this time, you'd think those problems would be solved, wouldn't you, after being on Zoom for so long? Well, good evening, everybody. If you haven't heard about the community rating system already, you may not know what it's about. The name isn't very descriptive. It's actually a discount program. It helps communities, communities can help residents lower their flood insurance costs by earning points. The more points the community earns, the more the discount the property owners in the community get. Lincoln is one of 7 communities in Nebraska that participate in the CRS, and it has the best rating. You live in a class 5 community, which means that the city has already earned more than 2,500 CRS points, and that equals a 25% discount for any floodplain property owner who has NFIP flood insurance. And the city's done all that by managing flood risk. They've done it with projects that lower flood risk. They've done it through flood outreach. If you've ever gotten a flyer in the mail or gone to a meeting like this one about flooding, that's something that the city earns points for, and those points will add up to future discounts. The plan that we're talking about tonight too, the Flood Mitigation Master Plan, is another planning process that will earn points. You can see the process here on the slide. There are 3 phases, and by following that process, the city is going to earn even more points in the community rating system. And it's going to identify projects that can lower rates even further. In a few minutes, you're going to hear about one project that the city's already done that they were able to earn CRS points toward. So all of the things that the city does to keep infrastructure safe from flooding, to keep people safe from flooding, to improve the environment in the floodplain, all of those things can reduce flood insurance costs. And why do we want to reduce flood insurance costs? Well, if you've ever paid for flood insurance, you know it's very expensive. Price-wise, the only thing flood insurance has going for it is that it's cheaper than paying for flood damage. But other than that, it's pretty expensive. So by lowering flood insurance costs, the city can help residents get and keep flood insurance. And when you have flood insurance, you can recover from flood damage more quickly, and that's good for everybody. It's good for neighborhoods, it's good for the community, it's good for the property owners who are able to recover quickly. So we want to make those costs manageable so that people can have that safety net during the next flood. The next slide. So the city of Lincoln already has a hazard mitigation plan. It's a multi-community plan that was developed with the Lower Platte, I'm going to get this wrong, the Lower Platte South National Resources District. It's a regional plan, and regional plans are great for hazard mitigation, especially great for flooding, because you don't flood alone. Rivers hardly ever stay in one community. They go through many communities, and what one community does to manage their flooding or to not manage their flooding makes flooding better or worse for their neighboring communities. But the city wanted to take the planning process one step further. So in addition to the hazard mitigation plan they already have, we're developing this flood mitigation master plan, which focuses specifically on the flood risk in Lincoln and what we can do about it. So the planning process, like we said, will earn more CRS points. Right now, like I said, you have a 25% discount on flood insurance, and that's great, but it can be better. So by following this process, by developing this plan, by following through on the projects that are identified in the plan, you can continue to rack up CRS points and continue to get bigger and bigger discounts in the community rating system. And so finally, although this plan is specifically about flooding in Lincoln, what happens in one community affects other communities, like we said. So part of the process is going to be to include neighboring communities and other area agencies to give them a chance to talk about what they're doing about flooding in their jurisdictions and look at how those projects might fit with projects in Lincoln. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike, and he's going to talk about one of those projects that has already earned you CRS points.
Thank you, Rhonda. Most of us who've lived in the Lincoln area for a period of time know about this project. The Antelope Valley project began back in the 1990s, and it's an overall multifaceted project. It wasn't just done for flood control. It was done for improvements, gaining just beautification process, and the parks, you know, the development of the park system through there. And but this is a major reduction in the floodplain was brought about because of this project. Can you move to the next slide? There we go. And as you can see from this picture here, the previous floodplain prior to this project was pretty vast, and the majority of this floodplain was reduced by just working with storage and developing different methods of controlling the drainage through there. A major project was put in with the Lincoln Zoo to develop a storage system through there and work with their drainage system, which was a major factor in reducing this floodplain. The very first project on Antelope Creek for flood control was the Holmes Lake project back, I think it was in the 1960s. I'm not a Lincoln native, so I'm trying to remember when that was done, but the levee built there, or the dam built there, was the first project to reduce the flood hazards along Antelope Creek. And along with this floodplain reduction, there was also water quality projects done at the same period. And so it has one of the great things that happened because of the water quality projects is we were back in the early 2000s, the EPA had called Antelope Creek for having an E. coli hazard. And so the watershed project was the watershed department with the help of the Lower Platte South NRD had been working on doing a reduction, and in 2018 the city received the okay to take it off it was delisted for E. coli, and it was a great benefit for the city, especially since this part of the creek is used heavily for recreation because of the trails and the parks and stuff. I think that's as much as I can get on, to reveal on what we're planning on doing here. The rest of our community has a lot of floodplains still. I kind of calculated it was around 20 square miles of floodplains that are within the city limits, which has about 4,000 properties involved in that. And so all of those properties being within the floodplain are required to carry the flood insurance. And that is going to be our project to try to figure out how we can reduce that floodplain or reduce the hazards that come with that floodplain. So I'll pass this on.
Mike just gave an excellent example of a very effective hazard mitigation activity, the Antelope Valley project, which would be categorized as a structural project, as we'll see. When we talk about hazard mitigation, or in the case of the flood mitigation plan, we're really talking about those efforts to reduce loss of life and property damage by decreasing the impacts of flooding. The community rating system categorizes flood mitigation activities into the 6 categories shown here. Let's discuss each of these in more detail, starting with the preventative activities. These activities keep flood problems from getting worse. This can be accomplished through activities such as planning and zoning, stormwater management, and open space preservation. One thing that is important in the implementation of these preventative measures is to really have good floodplain mapping so you know where the critical flood-prone areas are. And Lincoln has been very good in addressing preventative activities. Think about where some of our parks and open spaces are located. Along flood corridors, we know Wilderness Park is along Salt Creek, Tierra Park, and Antelope Park, all along flood corridors. Property protection is also generally referred to as a non-structural floodplain measure, and are activities usually undertaken by property owners on a building by building basis. Property protection includes relocating buildings out of the floodplain, acquisition of flood-prone structures through voluntary buyout programs, elevating buildings so that its lowest floor is above the flood elevation in the area, and of course, flood insurance. Natural resources protection are those activities that preserve or restore the natural and beneficial functions of flood corridors. Activities can include wetland protection, erosion, and sediment control programs. These are natural resources protection activities that the city and the Lower Platte South NRD are involved with. The district has specific programs like their Streams Interventions Program, their Trails and Conservation Corridor Program, and the city and the NRD are part of a group of state and local agencies involved with the Eastern Saline Wetlands Conservation Partnership that addresses natural resources protection. Emergency services are measures that include things like flood threat recognition, flood warnings, and protecting critical facilities from flooding. The Lincoln Electric System facility on North 27th Street is a good example of providing additional flood protection to a critical facility. There's a berm and floodgates that were constructed around that facility to increase the building's level of protection against flooding. Structural projects can include such things as dams and reservoirs, levees, and channel improvements. These are features you're probably most familiar with. Mike mentioned the Holmes Lake Dam, which provides protection to Antelope Creek. The Antelope Valley project that Mike mentioned is another great example of a structural project. And you may also be familiar with the Salt Creek levee system, which extends from Calvert Street to Superior Street along Salt Creek. Public information activities are those activities that advise the public on flood risk and ways to protect people and property from flooding. Both the city and the Lower Platte South NRD have excellent outreach efforts focused on flood damage reduction. You can go to the watershed management page on the City of Lincoln's webpage at www.lincoln.ne.gov to find resources and information related to flood damage reduction and flood insurance. As we identify flooding problems across the city, we can start to think about how these problems can be addressed utilizing the 6 mitigation activities that I just discussed to see how they can fit into an overall plan. As part of the comprehensive Salt Creek floodplain resiliency study that was recently completed, best floodplain management practices from around the country were reviewed. Recommendations for specific practices were made that address flooding and floodplain management in Lincoln. Let's talk about a few of these that are listed on this slide. First, the need for higher floodplain regulatory standards. The floodplain mapping that is currently used to regulate new development in Lincoln is based on outdated precipitation data. For this reason, it is necessary to consider increasing the standard for elevating buildings above the regulatory floodplain elevation from 1 foot to 2 feet. Riparian preservation and setbacks help to preserve the natural and beneficial functions of floodplains and provide space for flood flows. The city is currently discussing new minimum flood corridor recommendations as part of the update to the city's drainage criteria manual. The city is also considering updating its floodplain mapping. As I mentioned earlier, this update will incorporate up-to-date precipitation data. Lincoln has not had a formal voluntary buyout program in the past. The city has bought out flood-prone buildings though, but these buyouts have usually been associated with flood control projects like Antelope Valley. Concurrently with the timing of the remapping effort, the city is looking into creating a voluntary buyout program. This will be a pilot program targeting a specific area like the North Bottoms or the South Bottoms. Local and federal funding sources will be utilized. Oftentimes after a flooding disaster, there are federal funds that can be used specifically for voluntary buyouts. So this will be an important program to have in place and ready to go if funding becomes available. There are several other recommendations that can be considered, such as cluster divisions, overlay zoning, and low impact development, to name a few.
So discussing the planning process. So we are currently in phase 1. So we have organized a planning committee, and a lot of those folks are panelists this evening. And this effort is led by the City of Lincoln, and this team will meet about 6 times over the course of the year. And this also includes involving the public. So this public meeting is a part of phase 1 of the planning process. Other virtual outreach tactics include the mailings, which you may or may not have received an invitation through email from our distribution lists for this meeting. And there's also a survey located on the project page, which you can get to by clicking the link in the chat that I have left. But other efforts include webcasts, and then there is a plan to have a public meeting in the spring of 2022 as well, which we'll look at the next slide. But Brian will discuss phase 2 and phase 3 for the planning process.
Thanks, Haley. The work involved with phase 2 risk assessment is well underway. An extensive data inventory has been compiled, and along with information from the Salt Creek Floodplain Resiliency Study, this provides an excellent assessment of the flood hazards in Lincoln. Data such as historic flood information, repetitive loss structures as identified by the National Flood Insurance Program, a review of the Lower Platte South Multi-Hazard Mitigation Plan, previous flood studies, flood insurance claim information, and inputs from citizens are just a few of the data sources that we have gathered. Another element that is important in the CRS planning process is future flooding conditions due to climate change, which was looked at extensively in the Salt Creek study. To assess the flood problems, we look at the circumstances that have caused flooding in different areas of the city. Flood issues derived from the same cause and near one another will be grouped together and assessed as one problem area. Once we have identified the problem areas, we'll examine each area on an individual basis and describe in detail how the flooding problem impacts the city. We will then move to phase 3, the mitigation strategy. The steps outlined in the mitigation strategy are the accumulation of the planning process and risk assessment. We'll take all the information gathered and begin the process of setting goals for the plan. We look at how particular mitigation activities address the flooding problems encountered and which activities should be pursued. A thorough explanation of the flooding sources that were reviewed and why specific mitigation activities are recommended will be described. And finally, a draft plan will be prepared and reviewed for adoption by the city. There will also be a 5-year update specified in the plan. This will reflect changes in development, local mitigation efforts, and changes in priorities.
So our schedule, I think the major points here for the public, I want to point out is just the project is going to be done within a year, and we will ask for public input in our public meeting number 2, which will be held in April of 2022. We will be, our goal is to stay on track, maintain we're currently keeping up with our schedule. And so we don't see any possible impediments to maintain the schedule. So we plan on meeting in April with everybody. And most of it is to be getting feedback on our draft and our action plan. And so we hope to get plenty of input, response, and see how and get some reflection on how we're moving forward here. So.
And that concludes our presentation, and I don't see any questions in the chat. So if you thought of anything that you wanted to ask any of the panelists, please go ahead and submit to the Q&A. But like I said at the beginning of the meeting, this presentation has been recorded, so it will be available on the project page, as well as a survey. That would be awesome if you could take 2 minutes out of your day just to fill it out and give us some feedback that way as well. Matt says thank you for the presentation. Thanks for attending, Matt. But if there aren't any questions, we will go ahead and end there. But I think I speak for everyone on the panel. Just thanks for taking time out of your day to listen, We can't wait to meet back up with everyone in the spring and defrost from the winter and talk about talk about the master plan. So, oh, I do see some. What areas other than Salt Creek are you looking at? Anyone from the panel that would like to answer?
Sure, I'll take that, Haley. We'll be looking at all the flood prone areas in the city of Lincoln. So areas that have been mapped, and we will also be looking for input from the citizens and other people, stakeholders in the areas of Lincoln that have also experienced some kind of flooding, and we'll take a look at those. It might not be mapped on the flood maps, but we'll take a look at that and see if we can come up with some mitigation activities that would be appropriate for those types of areas. So it includes all of the floodplains in the city of Lincoln. And Mike indicated roughly, was it 40 square miles of floodplain, Mike?
I think it's around 20.
20 square miles.
Great question. Any other questions out there that you'd like to have answered while the panelists are in front of you?
Yeah, one thing that I wanted to put out, is maybe could we let people know, as we're looking at, these problems and solutions that Brian referenced earlier, if there is input or information that the public would like us to know as we're doing that, what is a good way for them to, what kinds of information are we looking for or would we like to receive, and how can they get that to us?
That's a great point, Tracy. I do believe on the project page there is a contact information and that you're more than welcome to send suggestions to. And then also on the survey, there's an opportunity to provide feedback as well and type it in. So you're more than welcome to do that as well. But yes, I agree. Just streamlining suggestions or comments is a great point, Tracy, for us to look at. There's another question that says, is there a location to view all of the floodplain mitigation solutions the city is looking at? The city is looking at.
Maybe we could have a little bit of clarification on that. Is that related to the flood mitigation plan or the city's program of floodplain management? We will be posting information as we go forward on those areas that we are looking at and the potential mitigation activities that we're looking at and seeing. That will all be part of the report and information that will be brought back to the public as part of the next public meeting in April. But if that doesn't answer the question, boy, if there could just be a little clarification, try to do a better job of answering it.
If you'd like Brian to expand on that, feel free to submit another question. But there is another question that says, will notes to your meetings be published? For this particular meeting, there'll be a transcript that will be uploaded to the project page as well. But in terms of the planning committee meetings, we can also make those available on the project page as well. Any other questions out there? Answer. Like I said, through the survey on the project page, you're more than welcome to provide feedback, and we will go over that and discuss as a team and move forward from there. So it doesn't look like there's any other questions, so I'll go ahead and stop recording and just any final thoughts from the panelists?
Just feel free to reach out to me. my number is on the project the webpage. So I will, if I can't answer your question, I'll be more than happy to find you someone who can answer your questions. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, everyone, for your time this evening. We look forward to meeting up again soon.